You can follow this on the source page, on the first page on top. Echsof. But you have to know Hebrew Galatianish. This is a Hasidic version. Oy vey. Thank you. Read. Got the feedback? Echsof no yam Shabbos amateme uvo mitranede ay beskulatecho. Second stanza. Hayahove. Coming to Isha, ya, mi Shabbos. Back to the top. Echsof no yam Shabbos amateme uvo mitached ay beskulatecha. Third stanza. V'yulachamecha mevestoydema. In the benches, you have that line that he didn't sing in parenthesis. The third stanza. It's outside. Again, the refrain on top. Echsof no yam Shabbos amateme uvo mitached ay beskulatecha. Last stanza. Hashabbat. Shabbat no yam Shabbos. Yes, we are in Shabbos God. Amen. Shabbat goyde nachshayon avotecha. Goyde nachshayon Yisroel. V'tzekin abecha Yisroel yirevu yideshem. Ya Echsof, Zamatem, Mitacheder, ay, Nasecha. Ya, Right. So I'll tell you what the letters are. Well, there are different letters that are highlighted. Somebody once sent out a joke page about all the various hashkachas in America, the OK and the Star K, and each one a different organization. And they said the hashkacha in Gan Eden was the Yud K Vav K. I can. Yeah. Yeah, that's a story that was said about the Satmar Rebbe. That they said after he came to Gan Eden, so Hakadosh Baruch Hu, he asked Hakadosh Baruch Hu welcomes him, and he says, "Here you can eat everything." So the Satmar Rebbe asks Hakadosh Baruch Hu, "Who's the mashgiach here?" So Hakadosh Baruch Hu says, "Here, b'chvodi u'ba'atzmi, I'm the mashgiach." So the Satmar Rebbe thinks and thinks and thinks. And he says, "I'll take a fruit platter. I'll have a fruit platter." Masha batuach batuach. Problem is that, with humor, sometimes behind the humor, there's a lot of truth. And they're based on certain concepts and so on. Okay, time has arrived. Boker Tov. As usual, the Shurim are in memory of Elisheva Frist, Elisheva Sima Bat Zalman Aleh Shalom. I'd like to dedicate today's shir especially to the Refuah Shlema of one of the too many Chayalim wounded in the war. I'm speaking specifically about the son of Rabbi Moshe Taragin and Atara Taragin. We're talking about Noam Taragin, Noam Abraham Ben Atara Shlomid. We just heard this morning some encouraging news after we had heard just 2 days ago that he came out of his coma. Yeah, he woke up from his coma, and that he's being moved out of ICC, into the ward, ICU, the intensive care unit, leaving the intensive care for the regular ward, which is obviously a major step forward. And for those who are following, also the wounded soldier and the family of Jay and Deborah Solomon, they have an Eitan also, and he was also pretty seriously wounded, but he was already moved out of the hospital and now going into rehab, which is a very, very major step forward for him. And our own son Eitan was discharged from rehab yesterday, and just the past Friday, he was running in his hometown Talmon, and for the first time driving his car. And b'shat tova mutzlachat, he'll get back into the cockpit and do what he does well, and that is drive us crazy. So Mirz Hashem Kadosh Baruch Hu should send a refuah shlema to all of the chayalim, all the ptsuim, and they should be mekuyam b'hem yelech mechayel l'chayel, each one. Yeah. The family had asked, the family of the Tarragins, as the son's name is Noam, they asked if people could, especially Friday night, sing this song of the Karlina Rebbe, Rabbi Aharon Hagadol Mikarlin. I'll say spend a few minutes about this great personality who authored this song, Echsof, Noam Shabbat, and the word Noam, which means pleasant. factors in this poem several times over. And the Tarragon family asked as a type of segula if people can sing this song. It's not, I can tell you from my own self, we didn't grow up on this song at home. And it was brought into our house via our kids. Today's generation, the younger generation, they picked up on many, many highly spiritualized songs. And this is one of them, and is integrated into the very, very latest updated birchonim, we call them benchers, that have all the zmiras for Shabbat. So there's one particular one that many people have. I know it's on page 28, the Echsof. And it took time, even somebody who's musically inclined, to pick up all the nuances. As you heard it, I played it now, and you can hear, you have to know every kvetch and when every oive and how to do this right, how to fit it into the words. And one of the reasons is that the author was not well trained in the rules of poetic writing. So it does not have all of the features that you might expect in a poem of Ibn Ezra or Rabbi Yehuda Levi, who wrote with perfect rhythm, rhyme, and tempo, and so on. This is a little bit lopsided in terms of the poetry, but nevertheless, highly spiritual. Why I say highly spiritual is because practically all of the Zmirot poems that we sing on Shabbat, whether it's Friday night or Shabbos morning, they spend a fair amount of time about the eating and the enjoyment of Shabbat. Basar v'dagim v'chol matamim, we saw it last week in the Yom Zeh Mechubad, and it's going to show up in some of the other poems that are Shabbat related, because Oneg Shabbat is clearly one of the factors of Shabbat. And we're going to see that Rabbi Aaron from Karlin read into the Oneg part something different. And there's just not a word about delicacies and good food and nothing at all. There's something in this song that empowers you to rise up on Shabbat to a level of spirituality that you just don't know of during the weekday. Rabbi Aaron from Karlin, let's take him back to the 18th century. He was a student of the second generation of Hasidut. So first generation of Hasidut is the Baal Shem Tov, Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov. So it's a little over 250 years ago. And Rabbi Baal Shem Tov had a prime student. Now he had many people who were his followers. But if you want to talk about the lineage of the development of Hasidut from the Ukraine, where it started in Mezhevich, to Mezrich, it's another town in the Ukraine. We're talking about Rab Dov Ber from Mezrich, who is known as the Maggid from Mezrich. Rab Dov Ber, the Maggid from Mezrich. The word Maggid was actually a title of a Talmud Chacham who was not necessarily a posek halacha, but he ran around from town to town to give talks. He was a public speaker. And there were towns he was a darshan. He was somebody who knew how to give over a message with great excitement and so on. So some Rabbanim were also darshanim, but not all. Some Rabbanim, were just great Talmidei Chachamim, and they were not great speakers, public speakers. And you needed somebody in town to get up there and give us, knock him in the, a real crackerjack type of Shabbat Shuvah drasha. And some of the Rabbanim weren't able to do that. So they had Magidim. The word Magid means somebody who tells a story, but it's more than telling a story. They would use stories as part of their tactics of getting the message across. I have a distant cousin from New Jersey, Rabbi Howie Jackter, who once asked the Rav, when the Rambam says if somebody denies the Torah Shel Peh, and he also makrish magideha, he denies those who related the Torah Shel Peh. He asked the Rav if he thought he was one of those magidim. And the Rav answered in a very funny way. He says, I don't know what I am, but I'm not a magid. Because a magid, if you have to understand what that meant, it was a lower order of somebody in the hierarchy of Torah. But you have the magid from Dubnov, very famous in the Sefer Kol Kol Yaakov, where he would use all kinds of mishalim, all kinds of analogies to bring out a point and so on. So this was a Maggid. And now we're talking about the Maggid from Mezerich. So he was a Maggid. He went around from place to place. But he was a Talmud Muvhak, the top student of the Baal Shem Tov in terms of absorbing the message of Chassidut. And he gives it over to various people who, in their own way, developed the Chassidut as they did. So most probably the most famous was the founder of Chabad, and that was Reb Shneur Zalman from Liadi. And he goes to White Russia, and he spreads Chassidut in Russia. The most famous Talmud of the Maggid from Mezrich, who takes Chassidut from the Ukraine to Poland, was the Noam Elimelech, Rabbi Elimelech from Lizhensk. And a second name that belongs in that category, Menachem Mendel from Rimenov. I've been to Rimenov a few times. That's South Galicia, Southeast Galicia, not about a half-hour drive from Raisha, which is Rzeszów in Poland. So you have these two figures, but was probably the more dominant was the Noam Elimelech, Rabbi Elimelech from Lizhensk. But no small figure here of a Talmud from the Maggid from Mezrich was Rabbi Aharon from Karlin. And they called him Aharon HaGadol from Karlin, and that's because he had a grandson, Aharon, also from Karlin, in order not to confuse the grandfather and the grandson. So the grandfather is always referred to as Rabbi Aharon HaGadol from Karlin. And Karlin was actually not in Poland yet. They're actually functioning in Belarus and Lita. And this was the big clash between the Litvaks, the Misnagdim, and the Chassidut. It's not that the Litvaks were sitting in Vilna and the Chassidim were sitting in Poland. They had nothing to do with each other. Quite the contrary. The early Chassidic movement is actually based on the area which we call today Belarus and Lita. And then it moves to west to Poland and so on. So here, this Rabbi Aharon HaGadol from Karlin authors this Echsof, this poem, and his basic message is that we talk about Shabbat, we have to understand the absolute spiritual side of Shabbat. So it's true that from a halachic point of view, Shabbat comes in two flavors. It's Shabbat L'Hashem Elokecha. There's obviously a spiritual side for Shabbat, but there's also the human and social side to Shabbat that we're not just allowed to, but obliged to indulge in. And that's why there's kavod and oneg. So there's zachor and shamor from a biblical point of view, and we'll see what the zachor means, and in this Hasidic sense. And then there's the kavod va'oneg, preparing stuff, nice things before Shabbat. And we're holding the poem that we didn't do from the Hoshana, but one day we'll get back to it, where he says, kavod va'oneg korah b'Shabbat, levush uksut mechalefet b'Shabbat, ma'achal u'mishteh mechinam l'Shabbat, noam migadim man'emet b'Shabbat, su'udot shalosh mekayemet b'Shabbat, al shtei kikarot botzat b'Shabbat. This has to do with food. Those are meals and good food and so on. And it's all part of the Shabbos experience, except Rabbi Aharon Karlin is not talking about that at all. So let's see what this poem is all about. Yud Hey. So you just talk about structure. The four stanzas, and they're highlighted here. The four stanzas, the Yud from the God's name Yah, and Haya, the Hey, and the next stanza Vu, the Vav, and the last stanza, HaShabbat, the Hey, spells out God's name, right? Yud Ke Vav Ke, the Shem HaMfurash. So that's one thing. But then if you look at the second word, Echsof, the Aleph is highlighted. The second word of the second stanza, Hoveh, the Hey is highlighted. The second word of the third stanza, Rachamecha, the Reish is highlighted. And the Nun, which is the second word of the fourth stanza, is highlighted. That's Aaron. So here, Rabbi Aharon from Karlin did not do what, let's say, Yudah Levi did in having the acrostic, the first, or Shlomo Levi al-Kabatz of the Lechadodi, the Shlomo Vazhar the Shin, Likrat Shabbat, the Lamed, Mikdash Melech the Mem, and so on. So that was the classic way of doing it. Here, he uses his name as the first letter of this second word. And then there's even a further allusion. the third word is also highlighted, and that is Noam, the Nun, the Shin from Shmor, the Mem from Mitgolalim, and the Hey from Hanashamot, and it spells out the word Neshama. So he's telling you right away that this is going to be a Neshama Dika, if I can use that Yiddish phrase. It's going to be a poem that has to do with Neshama, not the Gashmi, not the physical, not the material. So here you have so he had good, intuition in terms of certain poetic ways, but those who understand Hebrew poetry will point out that it doesn't match. If you look at the lines, you see they're imbalanced. You can see that there's an imbalance here. Some lines are just longer than the others, and that sometimes doesn't make sense, from a meter or point of view. But the rhyme he's going to get in anyway. So let's see what this is. He opens up with a Kadosh Baruch Hu's name. What do we know about a Kadosh Baruch Hu's name of two letters, Yud and Hey? What do we know about it in terms of the other names? The names of a Kadosh Baruch Hu have meaning. They spell out meaning. It's not that a Kadosh Baruch Hu has, multiple names. Multiple names means that there are different ways that we will relate to a Kadosh Baruch Hu. I mean, the classic, kids who learn Chumash Rashi in Bereshit. So Hashem Elokim. So Yud Kei Vav Kei, Chazal say this is Midat HaRachamim. It's the measure of compassion. And Elokim is Midat HaDin. The thing is, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Is Elokim the name of God as Midat HaDin? And that's why in Parshat Shoftim, judges are called Elokim. V'nikrav ba'al bayit el Elokim, im lo shalach yado b'melechet re'yehu. Or, this is the other way around. Elokim means judges. But when we refer to Kadosh Baruch Hu as a judge, we use the name judge, which in this case is Elokim. So that's a story in itself. But when we study Breshit, when we talk about God creating the world, Breshit bara Elokim, and only in the second chapter there's a Kadosh Baruch Hu's name of Yud Kei Vav Kei added to it, and then Chazal have something to say about that there was almost a change in direction, the way this was going. Or Elokim has something to do with the laws of nature, because the laws of nature function by rules and regulations. And rules of nature are not subject to change. I mean, without getting into the whole story of miracles, I mean, the Rambam believed that the splitting of the Red Sea, I mean, almost the ultimate miracle in Sefer Shmot, was grounded in natural law. I don't remember seeing it, but he said that if you can do this at home too, in home laboratory. You take a pot of water and take a high-powered fan and hold it on top of it. You're going to see Kriyas Yamsuf in your pot of water. The water is going to split because the air is going to force the middle. And the Torah tells us, "Vayolach ruach kadim azak kol halayla." There was a tremendous gust of wind, and that caused the splitting. So if the whole thing was anchored, so we know from CNN, there's a thing called weather and there's a thing called extreme weather. So this was an extreme weather, but extreme weather is also weather. Extreme weather is also Mother Nature. So where was the Nes in Kriyas Yamsuf? The Rav said in the timing. The Rambam says rather. The Rambam says it was the timing that just when Am Yisrael was there, so this natural phenomena, hypernatural phenomena happened, and it caused the Kriyat Yamsuf. So Mother Nature is capital M and capital N. Right. So the getting back, so when we talk about Shemot of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we have the 7 names that cannot be erased. Yud Hey is one of them. Yud Hey Vav and Hey is another one. Aleph Lamed is another one. Aleph Lamed Hey Yud Mem, and so on. Shin Daled Yud. There's 7 names that you're not allowed to erase. And then there are the Kinuyim, that is the nicknames of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that refer to specific character. Rachum, Chanun, Erech Apayim, and so on. They are nicknames. Shalom is a nickname of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. There's a whole question whether the nicknames of a Kadosh Baruch Hu can be said in the bathroom. Because you're not allowed to say Shem Hashem. That's why people are careful in the public bathrooms of a shul on Shabbat. When they see somebody go in or out, they don't say Shabbat Shalom. Because Shalom is a nickname of Kadosh Baruch Hu. That's a machloket between the Rambam and the Ravid. How much we have to keep careful about the nicknames of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. But Yud Hey is used in the end of Parshat B'Shalach at the end of the Milchemet Amalek. Ki yad al kes ya milchama lashem ba'amalek midor dor. There it says the hand of the seat, but it doesn't say kisei, it says kes, kaf samach. There's an aleph missing. And the Yud Dalet is not whole. Yud Hey is not whole because it's not Yud Hey Vav and Hey, it's Yud Hey. And the Chazal understand that when there is Milchemet Amalek, God's name is truncated. It's not full. One day it's going to be full and complete. You know when? On that day, God's name is going to be complete. And what does it mean complete? Recognized by everybody. Avraham Avinu started the mission of getting the nations of the world to recognize HaKadosh Baruch Hu's existence. But the job's not done yet, because there's some people that don't fully recognize HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So one day he will be fully recognized. Until that happens, God's throne is cut. Kes, not kisei. Ya, Yud Hey, not Yud Kei Vav Kei, and so on. So the author, the Rabbi Aaron Mikarlin, deliberately opens up with Shem Hashem, and he's already telling us something. By using the Yud Hey, even though the poem spells out Yud Kei Vav Kei, that's almost the longing towards. We have something to strive for. What do we have today? Today we have Yud and Hey. But we're longing for something much more loftier, the complete. And that's why the poem will spell out by abbreviation the Yud, Hey, Vav, and Hey. And what basis do I have on saying that this is a poem of striving? The next word. What does Echsof mean? What does Kisufim mean? Kisufim means longing for, longing for. There's something that I'm longing for. What am I longing for? Noam Shabbat, the sweetness of Shabbat, Hamat Emet Umitachedet Biskulatecha. The sweetness of Shabbat is appropriate. We use that word in modern Hebrew, matim. Zelo matim, zeken matim. Matim, hatama means appropriateness, fitting, and unifies. It's fitting and it unifies with who is the skulatecha. Who's he referring to? Who is the Am Skula? The chosen nation, Am Yisrael. So look at source number 1 on the bottom. These are the psukim from Shmot, Perek Yutet, it's Parshat Yitro. Vata im shemoa tishmu b'koli ushmartem et briti. Right? If you pay attention to my words and keep and guard my covenant, v'yitem li sgula mikol ha'amim ki li kol ha'aretz. You will be special for me. And the question is, what is the idea of the chosen nation? You know who spelled it out beautifully? And it was a Kiddush Hashem? It was Chaim Herzog at the United Nations. There was a resolution that raised the Zionism as racism, remember, 1975? And he got up there in the UN, Chozot, the son of a Rav Rashi, he remembers something from his early childhood, and he was well read. Chaim Herzog, then later becomes president of Israel. He was Israel's ambassador to the United Nations at the time, and he gave a whole drasha at the UN about the segula quality of Am Yisrael, and based on sources. It was just a beautiful speech. I'm sure you can download it today on Google. So the idea of segula is the uniqueness. Am Yisrael is the Am Segulecha, your chosen people, your favorite people. So what is he saying in line number 1? That the Noam Shabbat, I'm looking forward, I'm yearning for the moment where the sweetness of Shabbos is going to be appropriate and a unifying factor with your people. Something about the sweetness of Shabbat that will merge with Am Yisrael. Rabbi Aaron Mikarlin categorically is saying it didn't happen yet. But it's a yearning. Just like the full name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not evident yet, what we're yearning toward. At the moment, it's just Yud Hey. Milchama Lashem ba'amalek b'dor dor. It's still, we're yearning for it. Mishoch Noam Yiratcha. Already a second time the word Noam. Mishoch Noam Yiratcha le'am mevakshe ritzonecha. you should push. What does it mean, push? Mishoch usually means pull or push. In this case, one second. Noam yiratcha. Now, this is a funny expression. We know that there is ahavat Hashem and there's yirat Hashem. One is love of God, and one is the fear. Now, the fear of God, actually, the word fear is inappropriate. It's most probably awe, A-W-E. And and when the Torah speaks about et Hashem Elokecha tira, you should have awe from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the Rambam explains in the very beginning of his Mishneh Torah, how do we fulfill these two mitzvot of Ahavat Hashem and Morah? So he says that Ahavat Hashem is a longing to know HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Rambam is non-emotional here. It's an intellectual connection. To know HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that is the closeness, the dveikut, the connecting, according to the Rambam, means that a person wants to know HaKadosh Baruch Hu better, as best as humanly possible. Obviously, a Novi is going to know HaKadosh Baruch Hu better than somebody who might be the outstanding Torah luminary, and the outstanding Torah luminary is going to know HaKadosh Baruch Hu better than somebody who's just engages in Torah study. And the person who engages in Torah study is going to know HaKadosh Baruch Hu better than somebody who dabbles here and there, and here's a Parshat HaShavua on Shabbat, and so on. So everybody according to their level of Ahavat Hashem. But then the Rambam says, when you really figure out on your level, your closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you retreat, you jolt back, because you realize how far the gap between you and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is. It causes a recoil. It causes a recoil. And that recoil, the Rambam says, that's Morah. That's Morah. Chazal say it, by the way, with regard to Har Sinai, that Am Yisrael got close to Har Sinai to listen to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and next thing they know, they were 12 miles behind. They just couldn't take it. They just jolted back. So that's Morah. That's Morah. So here, the Rabbi Aaron Mikarlin is willing to tell us that this Morah is sweet. I would venture to say that that's the last word in the language that I would associate with Morah. A sweetness, Mishoch Noam Yiratcha Le'am Mevakshei Ritzonecha. It could be he is saying that the Morah, the awe, the sensation that we have for Kadosh Baruch Hu, which causes distance. By definition, it causes distance. It's very difficult to get close to a person who you have awe from. And Chazal say on the pasuk, Et Hashem Elokecha tira, you have to have awe from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What is the word et? It says, every time the Torah says et, so some of the Chachamim say it comes to include something that's not in the pasuk. Et lerabot tamidei Chachamim. So I remember my father told me this was a humoristic take on the drasha, that the Rabot Talmidei Chachamim comes to teach us that Talmidei Chachamim also have to have some Yirat Shamayim. It wouldn't hurt. That was said in some context of Beseda. But what is the pshat? Et Hashem Elokecha tira lerabot Talmidei Chachamim. That you also have to have that level of awe standing before the great Talmid Chacham. And the truth is that the Hasidim of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, you saw it. Talmidim of Soloveitchik, the Rav, you saw it. You saw it. That was a gauge of the greatness of a person, of how much awe you had when you knew that you couldn't just have a shmoozy shmooze, but you had to measure your words carefully, and you were shaking when you were talking to somebody. So Chazal say, "He morach shamayim ki morah b'nei," that the morah shamayim should be like the morah you have for your Rebbe, morah bach. So Chazal say, "That's all. That's what you're supposed to have, the morah shamayim." So the answer was, "Halavai, you get to that. That's already madrega. Not so easy. Not so easy." But here, Rabbi Aaron Mikarlin is suggesting that because the morah it creates a distance, he says we should push us, HaKadosh Baruch Hu should push us to see it in a sweet way, which means to soften the blow of the morah, and it should be a sweet. Why? Because it's the Am Mevakshe Ritzonecha. It's the nation that is seeking out your will. And to seek out your will, you need closeness. And it's morah that creates the opposite effect. But the Noam Shabbat is the Noam, the sweetness, that somehow smooths out the sharpness of the Morah. And this can work. And he says, Kachenu bikdushat hashabbat hamit achedet b'toratecha. We ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Kachem bikdushat hashabbat hamit achedet b'toratecha, that God should sanctify us with the sanctity of Shabbat that is also unified with Torah. So now you have a unification of Shabbat with Am Yisrael, Bizgulatecha, and now you have a unification of the Shabbat with Torah. So if A equals B and B equals C, so A equals C. Remember that? That's the transitive property. Learned this in 7th grade. If A equals B and B equals C, so A equals C. I remember the Rav using this once to explain the idea of dveikut in the Gemara sense, where it says Vatem hadveikim b'Shem Elokechem chayim kulchem hayom. You should be connected. So the Gemara says V'chi efshar li daveik b'kutcha b'richu. How is it possible for the finite to connect with the infinite? So the Gemara gives a few practical suggestions. One is, if you have a daughter of marriageable age, see to it that she marries a Talmid Chacham. And if you yourself are on the shidduch market, so marry a girl who's a daughter of a Talmid Chacham. So the Rav said, that's it? This lofty idea of dveikut just boils down to shidduchim? That's it? He said, no. The point that Chazal were doing was giving an illustration. If you have a son-in-law, or if you have a father-in-law, who are great Talmidei Chachamim, so the talk around the table of lunch is going to be Torah. Because most people think the Torah is when you come to a shiur for an hour and you open up the books and you talk about Torah, fine. And afterwards you go and do your other things. And when you have lunch, and you talk about the menu at the restaurant. That's the talk of town. If you're not talking about the politics or the weather. So, but at a table of a Talmid Chacham, in the household of a Talmid Chacham, whether it's the side of the father-in-law or the son-in-law, there's going to be a lot of Torah talk in the air round the clock. And the point that Chazal was saying, you know what dveikut with HaKadosh Baruch Hu means? It means connected to the world of Torah. Why? Because if A equals B and B equals C, A equals C. If A is HaKadosh Baruch Hu and B is Torah and C is Am Yisrael, so if Am Yisrael connects to Torah, B equals C. But the B is the revelation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's will, A equals B, so then A equals C. That there's a connection between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Klal Yisrael, the one who studies, engages in Torah. That is the way Rabbi Chaim from Volozhin, the prime student of the Vilna Gaon, saw the highest level of dveikut today in his book Nefesh HaChaim. That's how he saw it. That's what he called Torah Lishma. As opposed to Torah to prepare yourself for being a good Jew, he called that Torah Shelo Lishma. But Torah Lishma means the connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the A equals C factor. Here too, Rabbi Aaron Mikarlin is using that kind of equation of A equals B, B equals C, with regard to Shabbat, Am Yisrael, Torah, and Am Yisrael, and Torah and Shabbat, and therefore, ultimately, the Shabbat is the unifier between Am Yisrael and Torah, or Torah and Am Yisrael together unify with Shabbat. So it's a very, very big moment of unification. And this is all in the spirit of what the Zohar says, that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates the world, Histakel be'oraita ubara olama masar Yisrael. That he looked in the Torah, created the world, and gave it to Am Yisrael. That this trilogy here, this of Torah and HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Am Yisrael being forged together. And it all happens here on Shabbat. And then he continues, where he says, Kachem b'kedushat HaShabbat ha'mitachedeh b'toratecha, p'tach lahem noam, another usage, the third usage of noam. P'tach lahem noam v'ratzon liftoach sha'arei ritzonecha. So we ask Kadosh Baruch Hu that he should open up the gates of this sweetness of will, to open up the gates of your will, In other words, again, we're borrowing into the sweetness of the Shabbat here, as he understands it as the unifying factor between Am Yisrael and the Torah and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So your gates will open up, which means, broadly stated, the first stanza, he's telling us how do we enter into the abode of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And we can do it every single Shabbat. And then he says, Haya Hoveh, but in order to understand this business of the unity, let's look at source number 2 on the page. Tani Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. Reb Shimon Bar Yochai says, Shabbat, Amra Shabbat lefnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Shabbat said to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ribono shel olam, lechulan yesh ben zug. All of the days of the week have a partner. Yom Rishon has Yom Sheni, Yom Shlishi has Yom Revi, Yom Chamishi has Yom Shishi. Vili, speaking about himself, Shabbat, ein li ben zug, I don't have a partner. Amalo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God says to him, Knesset Yisrael hi ben zugcha. Am Yisrael is going to be your partner. V'kevan she'amdu Yisrael lifnei Har Sinai, when Am Yisrael stood at Har Sinai, Amar lehem HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God said to them, Zichro hadavar she'amarti l'Shabbat. Remember what I told Shabbat. And what did I tell Shabbat? Knesset Yisrael hi ben zugcha. Am Yisrael is your partner. Hainu dibur. This is the saying, Zachor et Yom HaShabbat l'kacho. The interpretation of the Reb Shimon Bar Yochai of what is the fourth diber in the Aseret HaDibrot, Zachor Yom HaShabbat l'kacho. We are to remember the promise that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave to Shabbat, that yes, you're not out there in the cold without a partner. Your partner is going to be Am Yisrael. And this is what is very nice. And this is what Rabbi Aaron Kalir from Karlin is saying in the very beginning, Echsof Noam Shabbat Hamat Emet Umitachedet B'Skulatecha. Why is it Mat'im? Because it's the partner. Am Yisrael and Shabbat become the partner. Mat'emet B'Skulatecha. Skulatecha is Am Yisrael. And this is obviously based on this particular midrash of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. And then the idea of Hayahoveh. Let's look at the next stanza. Hayahoveh shmor shomrei umitzapim Shabbat kochecha. What is Hayahoveh? Past and present. But he means HaKadosh Baruch Hu. How do you know that means HaKadosh Baruch Hu? So, Yafeh, you just said it. The Rambam tells us in the Moreh Nevuchim, but it's not something that's exclusive to a philosopher like the Rambam. We look at Shem Hashem. So we write 4 letters, Yud, Hey, Vav, and a Hey. We dare not say it in those words. We use the substitute, Aleph, Dalet, Nun, Yud. Whenever you say a bracha, Baruch Atah Hashem, we say Aleph, Dalet, Nun, Yud, in place of Yud, Hey, Vav, and Hey. We don't spell out Shem Hashem. Where was Shem Hashem voiced? In the Beit HaMikdash. When the Kohanim said Birkat Kohanim, and there are 3 usages of Shem Hashem, Yivrech Hashem, Ye'er Hashem, Yisa Hashem, they said the Shem HaMfurash. We say, when the Kohanim say Birkat Kohanim, it's Yivrecha Adonai v'Yishmerecha, Ye'er Adonai panav elecha v'chunecha. So it's not Yud Kei Vav Kei. But in Beit HaMikdash, they used the Yud Kei Vav Kei, and there was a response, Baruch Shem Kvod Machuto L'Olam Va'ed. So too, the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, when he quoted the pasuk, "Ki beyom hazeh yichaper alechem letaher etchem mikol chatotchem lefnei Hashem titaru." Before when he said the word Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei, ve'akohanim ve'am omdim ba'azara kishayu shomim et Hashem hanichbad v'hanora mefurash yotzei mipi Kohen Gadol hayu korim mishtachavim modim means to confess mitvadim. ונופלים על פניהם ואומרים ברוך שם כבוד מלכותו לעולם ועד. So anytime they heard Yud Kei Vav Kei in Beit HaMikdash, there was a response, Baruch Shem Kvod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. So the Rambam tells us that Yud Kei Vav Kei, those 4 letters, is nothing but a contraction, a type of kvetch of 3 words, Haya, Hoveh, and Yiyeh. past, present, and future. And that is a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Kadosh Baruch Hu is above time. There's no past, there's no present, and there's no future. You can't say yesterday a Kadosh Baruch Hu said. You can say a human being said something yesterday. We measure our existence in terms of time and place, but not a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Is it just above that? So in Adon Olam, Hashem Alach, V'hu Haya, V'hu Yeh, we say it, right? So he is, was, and will be. That means that every single tense of time applies to Kadosh Baruch Hu at the same time. That's the point, at the same time. There is no unique past as opposed to the exclusion of the future. It's all the same. And this led to great philosophical issues. How could there be free will, b'chira chofshit, if a Kadosh Baruch Hu is Haya Hoveh V'yeh? That means that every fraction of our time framework, Kadosh Baruch Hu is knowledgeable of what will happen. And therefore, so if a Kadosh Baruch Hu knows that you're going to choose this way or that way, how can you be held liable to mitzvot or averot? This is a big philosophical issue that the Rambam deals with, because it is a big philosophical issue. And Spinoza didn't want to shrink a Kadosh Baruch Hu's greatness, and therefore he said that apparently there is no free will. There's no free will. And the Rambam says if there's no free will, then you can close up the shop, because then there's no accountability. You have to have accountability. So how does that work with the Kadosh Baruch Hu Kol Yachol? So the Rambam says, "Von a kasha starbt man nicht." Well, he didn't say it that way in Yiddish, which means nobody ever died from a kasha. But he leaves it a little open-ended because it's problematic. And he says, there are things that our human intellect cannot grasp, but it's there anyway. And Yeshayahu said, our mind and our way of doing things is not the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu does it, and you have to believe that. You have to believe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Kol Yachol, is Haya Hoveh V'yeh, and he allowed for free choice. Even though it seems to, in our little meek minds, that this is contradictory. So the Haya Hoveh is actually, he's calling on a Kadosh Baruch Hu, but it's already more than Yud and Hey. Now it's Haya and Hoveh, and we'll see where this is marching towards. Maybe he's already alluding, it's marching to the future. But Kadosh Baruch Hu was and is, what about will be? He's still using a fraction of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, but more than the Yud K of the Yud Hey of the first line. Haya Hoveh, Shmor Shomrei Shabbat, Shomrei Umitzapim Shabbat Kochecha. We ask a Kadosh Baruch Hu to guard those who keep Shabbat. We use the word keep Shabbat, observe Shabbat, but it's Shomer means to guard Shabbat. Umitzapim, sit on Shabbat afternoon and wait for Shabbat, with anxiously waiting for Shabbat. The Rambam actually describes the mitzvah of Kavod Shabbat, which applies to Friday, not only the things that we do in preparation, but it's also the waiting. He uses the word miyachel that we use in Tehillim, Yachel Yisrael El Hashem, means longing for waiting with great expectations. Like you have a guest coming, somebody's coming, you're already standing by the door, to see if they're going to pull in, and or sit at least by the window, to see when somebody's arriving. You're so anxious that they're going to come, and you can't wait. You can't wait for Shabbos to come. And that's why the Yemenites, based on the Rambam, by the way, had the custom that on Friday afternoon, going to shul, they had the talis already with over the head, because talis over the head means Shechina, means that God's presence is coming. And they would already sit with the talis over the head Friday late afternoon in anticipation of the arrival of Shabbat. This is called mitzapim. They're waiting for Shabbat to arrive. Ke'ayal tarog alafikei mayim. Kein nafsham tarog likabel noam Shabbat. Again, noam Shabbat. Hamitachedet b'shem kodshecha. If you take a look at the source number 4 on the second page, it's straight out of Tehillim in Perek Membet. Ke'ayal tarog alafikei mayim. Like the deer that's standing over the water source, anticipating that he's going to get water. Kain nafshi ta'arog elecha elokim. That's how I long for closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And I go back to the poem. You see how Rabbi Aaron Hagadol Mikarlin integrates this pasuk, almost word by word, into the fabric of the poem. What kind of waiting am I waiting? I'm waiting like David HaMelech explained the way we wait for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ke'ayal tarog alafike mayim, ke nafsham tarog likabel noam Shabbat. I'm waiting for the sweetness of Shabbos to arrive. Hamit achedet b'shem kachecha, that will unify with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Oh, now what do we have? We have three unifications. We have Shabbat unifying with his people, with Am Yisrael. We have Shabbat unifying with Torah, Hamitachedet b'Toratecha. And now we have Shabbat unifying with HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. It's all one big harmonious whole of Am Yisrael, Torat Yisrael, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, all with Shabbat. And then he says, Hatzel me'acharai, you should guard, Hatzel me'acharai, lifrosh min Shabbat. You know, Shabbos is going to end. And it ends at a certain time. But just like there's a concept of bringing Shabbat in anticipation before Shabbat starts, there's also this idea of not letting go. By the Hasidim, this was big. This was really, really big. Sudash Lishit would drag on way into the night of Motzei Shabbat. I mean, the story was that, you know, there's a Kabbalistic idea that the fire of Gehenna doesn't function on Shabbat. And that's why, by the way, on Motzei Shabbat, after Shmoneh Esrei, and now's the first moments of Motzei Shabbat, we say, Yoshev b'seiter elyon, b'tzel Shaddai yitlonan. It's in the Siddur, Motzei Shabbos davening. And that's Perak Tzadik Aleph and Tilim, Ki malachav yitzaveh lach lishmocha b'chol derachecha, that we ask Kadosh Baruch Hu to protect the neshamot that are going back to Gehenna. And that because 6 days of Gehenna is Gehenna. And whatever the Gehenna is, I don't know what Gehenna is, but whatever it is, it's powerful. But that's why if there's a Yom Tov during the week, so it's not 6 days of Gehenna, because Yom Tov also, the neshamas get a break. So that's why we don't say V'inoam and V'yoshev b'seiter elyon on Motzei Shabbos if there's Yom Tov during the week. If the Yom Tov is on Shabbat, then we will say Yoshev b'seiter. If Rosh Hashanah comes out on Shabbat, like sometimes it comes out, so the Motzei Shabbos before, we will say, because it's a full week. But if Pesach comes out on Shabbat, we won't say it the week before. You know why? Because 6 hours of Erev Pesach is already Yom Tov. So therefore, it's 5.5 days. Because of Korban Pesach, exactly. So it's Yom Tov. And the proof is not so much the Yoshev b'seiter elyon. She wouldn't know from Tzarot, but if a person sits Shiva before Rosh Hashanah, like I had with my father, so you get Shiva ends with sundown. I mean, every Rav says take 2 hours to get yourself ready, but the Shiva technically ends with sundown, with the onset of the Yom Tov. On Pesach, it's with Chatzot, with noontime, because Yom Tov starts already on Chatzot, right? So the idea of Mosifin Mechol ala Kodesh, which means adding from the Yom Tov, from the Shabbos to the weekday. And so what we want to do is keep the Shabbos holiness rolling for a little bit more. So the joke was that the Malach that guarded Gehenna and had to ignite the fires would look down at earth and say, did they daven Ma'ariv and bells yet? Because in bells, they wouldn't daven Ma'ariv till 11 o'clock at night on Motzei Shabbos to protect the neshamot a few extra hours. So the Malach would ask, did they daven Ma'ariv and bells? That's the story. So that already said something about when they daven Ma'ariv and bells. You know, that story. But the idea that we're waiting, Hatzel, we want to be guarded because we're going back to very difficult times, weekday, very difficult moments, weekday. And weekday is the absence of this Kedushat of Shabbat. And we ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hatzel, help, save us, me'acharei lifrosh min Shabbat, leaving the Shabbat. We're going to leave the Shabbat. Levilti tiyes sagur mehem shisha yamim. We shouldn't be locked into the 6 days as 6 days. But these 6 days, hamikablim kedushat Shabbat mi Shabbat kodshecha. The 6 days, there's something about Shabbat in these 6 days also, because they derive nourishment, spiritual energy from Shabbat. Now this sounds very Hasidic, and it sounds very, very Kabbalistic, but every single day we say this. Hayom Yom Revi'i b'Shabbat. We say it every single day. And the question is, where does this come from? The idea that even though we're going into the weekday zone of absence of Kedushat Shabbat, says Rabbi Aaron Mikarlin, it's not totally absent, because the 6 days derive some spiritual energy from Shabbat, and hence God should protect us in the 6 days with some of the flavoring, some of the sweetness of Shabbat. Yeah. Yeah, fair. So there are those who say, I remember people used to say that the gefilte fish you start preparing on Wednesday, because in the Shir Shel Yom of Wednesday today, that we said today, remember the last two psukim? L'chuna ranana l'Hashem nariya tzilshu yishenu. It's the opening pasuk of Kabbalat Shabbat. So it reminds us that there's Kabbalat Shabbat already, starting on Wednesday. But there's even another, you can even bring another halacha. You can bring another halacha to back you up now. And that is, until when can you say Havdalah Motzei Shabbat? Until Tuesday. Not Tuesday night, till Tuesday, till before sundown. You can make up Havdalah, is Moed Bet, as we say in the academic world, a makeup test, Moed Bet. You can make it up until Tuesday. I once heard Rav Meir Soloveitchik, that's the he's a big gun in the Spanish Portuguese synagogue in New York and at Yeshiva University. He's a grandson of Rav Aaron Soloveitchik. And Rav Aaron Soloveitchik had a lot of chumras with regard to ending Shabbat. There was the Rabbeinu Tam and the Shita, even after Rabbeinu Tam. I mean, you can get later and later. And Rav Meir said once here in Israel, he says, and in my house, we made Havdalah on Tuesday. I mean, because he wanted to say we had every chumrah in the book, as if to say Shabbos extends till Tuesday. But the point is that Shabbos, there's a certain thing about Shabbat that extends after Shabbat. But Wednesday already, it's already the next week. It's the coming week. Right. Not just Chabad. All of the Chassidim, into Malava Malka with lighting candles, by the way, Hadlakat Nerot. And there's a whole slew of Zmirot that we will do. Hamavdil ben Kodesh L'chol, Chatatenu Yimchol. This was not made just so that Ben Sion Shenka, Zechron Lebracha, will be able to cut records and with Mojitz and Agunim. These songs were sung at Malava Malkas, for sure. So here you have Rabbi Aaron Agadomi Karlin explaining that he's begging Kadosh Baruch Hu to save us. When Shabbos ends, it shouldn't end. It shouldn't end. That we want something to continue. Turn the page in source number 5. So now we're going to do a piece of Zohar. If you didn't go to the mikveh last night, so maybe we shouldn't do this, because the Zohar, you have to be pure. And I'm the furthest thing away from being a Kabbalist. I'm not, but let's see what he says here on Parshat Yitro, on Zochat Yom Shabbat Lekadsho. I'll try to read it and then translate it, okay? Zochat Yom Shabbat Lekadsho, Rabbi Yitzchak Amar, Ktiv, it says, Vavaroch Elokim et Yom HaShavi'i. Okay, that's in Bereshis. Uchtiv b'man, with regard to man that fell, that's Parshat B'Shalach, Sheshit Yamim Tilketuhu, 6 days you should gather up the man. Yom HaShavi'i lo yebo, Shabbat, the man won't fall on Shabbat. Kevan de lo mishtakech be mizone, so the day did not have food. Shabbat didn't have food. You won't find food on Shabbat because the man didn't fall. My birkata ishtakach be. What bracha, what blessing does the seventh day have if it doesn't have food? Ella, but hachi tana. This is the way you should read it. Kol birchaan dile'ela vitata'a. All the bracha of the upper spheres and the lower spheres is us, we're the lowest sphere, the Yoma Shvi'ian Tlayan are dependent on the seventh day. All brachot are dependent on the seventh day. Vitana, and we should teach. Amai lo ishtakach mana beyom mana. Why wasn't man found or given on the seventh day? Beyom Shvi'ah. Mishum dehu yoma mitbarachin minei kol shita yamin alehen. It is the day that carries the blessing from all the 6 days. The chad v'chad, in each one of the days, Yahiv mizone gives the sustenance litata to the earthlings, to those on the ground. That's us. Kol chad biyome me'ahi beracha demitbarchin biyom shvi. That is, on Shabbat, it carries a little bit of every day's blessing. So the month fell 6 days, and each day contributed not only to the food, but you might say, one second, Sundays didn't give to the Shabbos food. Friday had 2 portions, so you got your Shabbos food, but it wasn't Fridays even. Nevertheless, there was something about each day's portion that contributed to the lower order of existence, and that's us, the Olam Tata'ah. The spirituality of Shabbat actually nourishes from the bracha of the man of each individual day. To this end, this is what Rabbi Aaron Karlin is saying, the Tiyes Sagur Mehem Shisha Yamim Hamikablim Kedusha Mi Shabbat Kodesh. Each day of the week is absorbing something of the spirituality of Shabbat. And that's a Kabbalistic thought from the Zohar. And he says, and therefore, v'taher libam be'emet u'be'emunah le'ovdecha. Now this is taken out of our Shabbos davening. V'taher libeinu le'ovdecha be'emet. Right? So let me say a word about that, because I see we're gonna have to continue this. I'm sorry that we're gonna have to be at the same time, same station next week to continue this. I'm gonna leave you dangling here to see the punchline of this, but we did this already once. So let me just try to say something about the tefillah point. There was a pigua in 1974 in Ramat Magshimim in the Golan Heights, right? The PLO, and there were 3 students of Yeshivat Har Etzion who were visiting their friends. Two students were visiting their friends in the yeshiva in Ramat Magshimim in the Golan, and they were killed in that pigua.
My son was there.
There you go.
He came home Thursday night.
There you go.
So, no reason.
See on it?
This happened on Thursday night.
Okay. So in a lunch foot in the yeshiva in Gush Etzion, they decided to have a drill to make sure that if there's an infiltration, so all the guys should know what to do. So they did a drill, and at the end of the drill, at the gate of a lunch foot, one of the guys didn't know that the drill was over, and some chayal came in, another guy from the yeshiva, his name was Yitzhak Lavi, and his friend shot him by accident and killed him. It was a horrible, horrible thing. They didn't know the drill was over. And this guy didn't know the drill was over, and he saw it coming, shoot, he was trained, shoot, whatever. It was a horrible thing. So there was a whole issue in the family and the army. Do you say Hashem Yikom Damo on this boy? The family wanted that they should refer to him not just as Zichrono Livracha, but God should avenge, like anybody who falls as a kadosh. Here he fell in an accident, basically. And they said that the only reason that they're doing this drill is because of the Mechablim, and therefore the family felt it was Hashem Yikom Damo. Imagine they had to fight their way to get an acknowledgement that it's Hashem Yikom Damo. But about a year later, first yahrzeit, the yeshiva made a askara, and they put out a book on tefillah, and it was called Siach Yitzchak. The boy's name was Yitzchak Lavi, And it says, Vayetze Yitzchak lasuach basadeh, ein sicha ela tefillah. So everybody who contributed wrote articles on davening, on tefillah. And Rav Lichtenstein, Zechron Levracha, the Rosh Yeshiva, wrote on tefillah of Shabbat. And he made a point. He made several points, but the central point was that we know that tefillah means bakasha. You're asking for something. And what we ask for in Shemona Esrei is atachonenam dat and tshuva and slicha and refuah and parnasah and kibbutz goliyot. We have a whole agenda of what we're asking for. And it's all these things we don't say on Shabbat. So it's almost like tefillah without bakasha, without asking for something. Tefillah without bakasha is not tefillah. It could be Hallel, it could be this, that, but it's not bakasha, it's not tefillah. So Rav Aaron said, there is tefillah on Shabbat, but it's a different agenda. It's kachenu b'mitzvotecha, v'tein chalkenu b'toratecha, sabe'enu mituvecha, v'samchenu b'shuatecha, v'taher libenu lovdecha be'emet. It's a bakasha of spirituality. That's what it is. That's what we're asking for on Shabbat and on Yom Tov. And this is what Rav Aaron Gadol Karlin says, v'taher libam be'emet u'be'emunah lo avdecha. Next week, we're going to see what the Rachamecha Mitgolelim is all about. We're not through. We're going to see a connection to Yaakov Avinu, specifically to the exclusion of Avraham and Yitzchak. We're going to see a Kabbalistic idea of Neshama, Ruach, and Nefesh that he uses at the very end. HaShabbat Noam HaNeshamot, Hashvi Oneg Haruchot, Ve'eden HaNefashot, how he integrates an unbelievable Kabbalistic concept into this whole discussion here, and how it ends with another pasuk from Tehillim of B'tzel Kenefecha Yechsoyun Yirvayun Mideshan Beitecha, which we have as the last source as well. So we're going to pick up on this next week. So I will ask you either to give me back the pages, or I'll have it for you next week. And if you would like to take it, you please bring it next week as well. Okay? Thank you.